with the button. Now, yesterday, I kind of showed you guys how I wasn't finished yet. I hadn't sewn my sides, and I did that last night while watching YouTube. So I attached my sides so that way it's like a pocket, it's actually there. But I was able to do this top part even though these sides weren't ready, right? Because it doesn't really matter. I don't need the sides to be attached. I need to know like kind of where the lid, like where the middle is, but it was okay if these weren't attached. For the button, you have to have your loop attached. You have to, because that's going to dictate where the loop is. And when you close your pencil case, where that loop like lays down on your pencil case, that will tell you where your button has to go. So if you haven't put this on yet and you're like, well, let me attach the button. I have it. I'm ready for that part. No, don't do the button until the loop is done. So before we get started, let's talk about buttons. I know, fascinating, right? Buttons have a few different shapes. They have like a 2-hole and the 4-hole. Now, obviously, there's other types of buttons too that they don't have the hole on top. They have like this little thing on the back. Those aren't the ones we're using. We need these buttons. It doesn't matter which one you're using. The concept is the same. How we attach it is the same. What's different is how it might look. So let me show you this. I'm hiding part of my drawing. So with the 4-hole button, you can kind of do, I don't want to say a pattern, but it's really up to you how you want to show the thread. The little X is the most typical. That's like the most typical that anyone that has the 4-hole button does, just a threaded X in the middle. I've seen students do a little box. I've seen them do just like thread on the top, thread on the bottom, and not finish the box. It doesn't matter. I care if the button is functional. I don't really mind if you want it to be a pattern. With my button, the one I'm using, it only has 2 holes. So there really is no pattern. It's simply just attaching it. Now the drawing I was covering up, this is how we're going to attach the button. It's just like we did with the loop. You're coming from the back, going through the buttonhole, the back of the button, go into the next buttonhole to the back. So it's kind of like this little loop. You're just doing this little circular motion where you're just going in and out, in and out, in and out. Just like yesterday, you're going to grab some of the fabric every time you go to the back. And then you're going to come back through the button, come out, go back in, grab some fabric, come back through. And just like yesterday, you kind of just have to wiggle the button and see when you're done. Like mine might be different. Like I can't say like, oh, you do it 4 times. Yours might be different. Maybe you need to do it a little bit more. I'm going to use a clear button today so that way you guys can kind of see, I hope, unfortunately, sorry, first period. I think this will be a good idea. I'm going to show you kind of how it looks. I only have a 2-hole. The button with 4 holes, it's the same concept, but if you want to do a specific pattern, then you kind of have to pay attention. But for the most part, it's the same. So I have my button. I have my needle and my ugly fly knot ready. Now what we have to do, you're going to need a pencil or a pen. I'm going to use a pencil because I need to know where to put this button. It can't just go, like anywhere on my bag. Well, I guess you could sew it anywhere, but it's not going to work. So you're just going to close your lid of your pencil case. See where your loop wants to like lay down. And your button is going to go a little bit below the loop. So let me zoom in a little bit. So here's my loop. And I want the button to go a little below it. A little below it. So it's not going to go, because remember when we measured the bottom of the loop to the bottom of the button. I actually want the button to go a little bit below, almost like where the holes of the button are gonna be where the bottom of the loop is. And this is why, again, going back to my other example. Fasteners, or how we close things, it all relies on tension, especially with elastics. So because there's no pull to this elastic, the button and the loop are at the same spot, it doesn't stay very well. Like what this really needs, it needs tension. If this was pulled, then it's, this is very taut, it's very tight. So if it was pulled just a little bit, it'll hold a lot better. So again, mistakes are always good because they teach you how to fix them. Let's see, this is where it's gonna go. Get my button. And again, I'm just going a little bit below. I'm not gonna go like super far away. This will stretch, but you don't want it to warp your bag. So it's pulling so far down that your bag is like curling in. So you're just gonna kind of line it up. And I like to line it up where the holes are to the bottom of the loop. That gives me just enough stretch, not too much. Cool. Of course, I moved it right when. There we go. So once you have your button where it's supposed to go, you need to like put like a little mark. You can use a pen, you can use a marker. And so what I did, I kind of just like lifted my button and then just kind of gave me a little dot in the back. And I know that's going to be between the holes. That's where the button, like I'm not going to put it up here, down here. The little dash, I put it right where the two holes are supposed to go, right there. So that way I remember. This is the last time I'm going to bug you guys about this. Your ugly fly knot needs to be hidden. But every time we do this knot, sometimes it changes. Sometimes these little strings, they're bigger, they're longer, sometimes they're smaller. This one I made tended to be smaller, but what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna trim it. And the reason why is, so my button's pretty big, but if I had a button that was kind of small, there's a chance that I'm gonna show some of that ugly fly knot. And I don't want to, because this is the front of the bag of your pencil case. So I don't want that to show. So what you do is you're gonna look at your ugly fly knot. My knot is like right here. Like that's where the root of that knot is where it's gonna get stuck. And don't worry, it'll get stuck. Don't worry that it's gonna come through. And if it does come through, make a new knot, try again. What I really need to get rid of are just these outer little strings. Like those are the ones that were poking out. All I'm gonna do is just trim. Just trim those. I'm not gonna cut the knot. I'm just trimming those outer ones. So the knot's still there, it's just smaller. It's not as noticeable. Here's my button. As always, I gotta hide this knot. You always wanna hide it, you don't wanna see it. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to put it through the fabric first, then put it through the button. And I'll show you what I mean. Just like our loop, I'm gonna get some of my quilt. I'm not gonna go all the way through. And again, from my other one, you don't want to go all the way through because you're going to put pencils in here. And you just don't want it like knocking into that ugly fly knot. Your button might come off and that's going to be a pain to fix later. So you want to just grab some of the quilt. Don't go through to the inside. So I'm just going to go. That's where my little pencil line was. And I just pulled through. So there. And then, also, I know this is kind of silly, but check your button See which side you like better. Sometimes there's a side that's nicer than the other, like especially with like this one that has like a color. So you decide. Now, all I'm gonna do, this is the back of my button. Put my needle from the back and just like a little necklace. Just like I said before, we're just doing this loop. Grab a little quilt, go through the back, turn around, go through the button, grab a little quilt, go through the back, turn around, go through the button. When you're doing the 4-hole one, again, if you want a pattern, you want it to look a certain way, then you kind of have to like watch what you're doing. Well, please watch what you're doing at all times. But this one, you know, if you, especially with the square one, that one tends to take a little bit more planning. So here I am coming out of this hole. I'm going to go into this one. And in the beginning, it doesn't really matter because the button's not attached. So my thread's coming out of here, right, from the back. Now I'm going to go from the front, put my needle through. And now I'll start to have that line. Now here's the tricky part. What you're doing is you're always going to be grabbing some fabric. Grab a little bit of fabric. And then you can just see my needle. So I grabbed a little bit of fabric. I'm going to go in through the back of the button. Pull, pull, pull. Watch out for knots. Now I'm going to go back in from the front. And so what I tend to do, because the button will start to get really stiff, you won't be able to move it much. I hold the button down, I'll just go in from the front, grab a little bit of fabric, and then pull it out from the side. And you can see my button still like be able to shift, and it won't soon enough. From the back, I'm like tilting my button a little bit, go in through that first one. I do it again. Go back in, grab some fabric. Pull my needle to the side, then go from the back. What tends to happen is, this isn't hard. This is just kind of like the loop. You're just doing this like circular motion of grabbing fabric, go back into the button, come out of the button, go back into the button. What happens is we'll start watching a TV show, and instead of coming through the back, students will go into the front on the first one. And what happens is you get this little line. It'll do this. So you'll have this little piece, this little thread that's just like inside. Now there's two things you can do. Start over. Actually, there's three. Start over your button, the whole thing, or learn to, let go of perfection, or do it to the other side and make it look like you planned that happening. All of it works. So again, you're just doing this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Go in, grab some fabric. Don't stab yourself. Go through the back. And again, I'm just kind of like tilting this button so that way I could get into the back. In, grab some fabric. When you first start, you might want to double check you're not going through the back. And once you get kind of like a feel for it. Right, there's no yellow in there. From the back. Once this feels snug, because again, just like our loop, if it's like mine's still kind of moving around a lot, I'd have to do a few more times. I'm not going to do it right now because you guys get the gist, but just kind of keep wiggling your button. Once it feels like you can't really, like right now, I can kind of actually move it up and down. When it gets snug, you will like barely be able to shift it. That's kind of what you're looking for. Because don't forget, this loop is going to have tension. It's going to be pulling that button. So we want it to be as snug as possible. But once you're ready to finish, let's say you're done. You want to make sure that your needle is in the back. You don't want your thread coming out the front, because we got to do that same knot, just like we've done before. And I always, let me show you what I'm doing. When I'm putting my needle back into the button, I'm grabbing some fabric, but I don't want my needle to come out really far away. You see how all my threads kind of still behind the button? The further your needle comes out, the thread's gonna show. It's gonna it's gonna come out through here and then go all the way back, and I don't want that. I try to grab fabric, but kind of stay near where my other threads are, just so that way it doesn't show as much like outside the button. I thought I went through. Okay, so let's say I'm done. It's not wiggly. I mean, it's not as wiggly as possible, just like before. There's a lot of thread behind the button. You know, you've been making a bunch of passes. You're gonna do the same thing. Just find a stitch, a few stitches, doesn't matter. You're gonna slide your needle through. Remember, on the back of the button. That makes the loop. That's what we want. Through the loop, pull, 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 pull. And you're gonna do that one more time. Remember, we always do it twice. Slide it. Here's my loop. Through the loop. Pull, pull, pull. Oh, I was like, where are my scissors? And then again, you can't really get too close to the knot because the button's in the way. But then you're done. Bum-ba-dum. Now, if your button's doing kind of like what if your pencil case is doing what my pencil case is doing, kind of like these ears that are going up, it's just because it's not used to laying down. So if you put it under a book, lay it down this way, so like gravity is pushing those ends down, it'll lay flat in no time. I had a few students yesterday that were concerned about how like chunky their quilt was. It's okay. Once you start putting stuff inside here, you'll be okay. Like it'll start flattening itself out.